Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
Dex's return to Port Charles was nothing short of shocking, the kind of twist that ripples through every corner of town and leaves everyone scrambling to make sense of it. For months, nearly everyone believed that Dex Heller was dead. The circumstances of his supposed demise had been murky, tied up in mob wars, secret alliances, and dangerous enemies who would stop at nothing to eliminate Jason Morgan's loyal protege. Yet the truth was far more complicated than anyone realized. Dex hadn't just vanished, he had been taken, hidden away, kept from returning home. And when he finally stepped back onto the docks of Port Charles, alive and breathing, it was a moment no one had anticipated. But the real bombshell wasn't that he had survived against all odds, it was the revelation of who he truly was. Dex wasn't just some kid with military training who found himself tangled in Sonny Corinthos' organization. He was Jason Morgan's biological son, a secret that had been buried for years and now threatened to change everything. At first, the shock of Dex standing in the flesh was enough to paralyze those who saw him. Jocelyn Jacks was among the first to encounter him, and her disbelief was written across her face. She had mourned him, wept for him, and carried the weight of his memory as if it were an open wound that refused to close. To see him alive left her breathless, her emotions warring between joy, confusion, and anger that he hadn't found a way to return sooner. Dex, for his part, struggled to explain. The story he carried was heavy, burdened with details he himself had only recently learned, and telling it meant unraveling years of deception. Joss demanded answers, and she wasn't the only one. Carly Spencer soon learned of his return, and when she did, her instincts told her that something much larger was in play. She knew Dex's connection to Jason had always been oddly intense, almost uncanny in the way Dex mimicked Jason's loyalty and courage. But Carly never imagined that connection was rooted in blood. The revelation unfolded slowly, as if the universe itself knew the weight it carried. Dex confessed that during his time away, captured, hidden, and manipulated by forces still lurking in the shadows, he had discovered the truth about his parentage. DNA tests confirmed what he could hardly believe himself: Jason Morgan was his father. The news spread like wildfire, reaching Sonny, Sam, Michael, and everyone else in Jason's orbit. Some were skeptical, needing proof, while others couldn't deny that the pieces suddenly fit together. Jason, the man who had always been the ultimate protector, had unknowingly fathered a son who embodied so many of his qualities: fierce loyalty, quiet strength, and a dangerous knack for survival. Dex wasn't just some soldier who stumbled into Port Charles. He was Jason's legacy, walking and breathing in front of them all. Jason himself was floored. He had barely adjusted to Dex being alive, and now he was faced with the reality that this young man was his own flesh and blood. For a man of few words, Jason found himself struggling more than ever to articulate the emotions flooding through him. Regret for the years he had missed. Confusion over how it had all been kept from him. And an undeniable surge of pride, seeing how strong and resilient Dex had become despite the odds. Yet Jason was also burdened with fear that Dex would be dragged even deeper into the dangerous world he had tried so hard to keep his children away from. Jason knew all too well what it meant to grow up tied to the mob, and he wanted better for his son. But Dex, stubborn and determined, wasn't so easily swayed. For him, protecting those he loved and standing his ground were not choices, they were ingrained in him, just as they had been in Jason. Sonny's reaction was perhaps the most complicated of all. He had once trusted Dex, brought him into his inner circle, only to feel betrayed by secrets and lies. Now, learning that Dex was Jason's son, Sonny was forced to reassess everything. Jason was Sonny's brother in all but blood, the one man who had stood by him through everything. If Dex was Jason's son, then by extension, he was family. Yet that didn't erase the tension between them, the choices Dex had made, or the conflicts that had nearly destroyed them both. Sonny found himself torn between resentment and respect, between his instincts as a mob boss and his loyalty to Jason. And in the middle of it all stood Dex, trying to navigate a storm of emotions, loyalties, and expectations that threatened to consume him. For Jocelyn, the revelation was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it explained so much about Dex, the way he carried himself, the sacrifices he made, and the unshakable sense of honor that reminded her so much of Jason. On the other hand, it complicated their already tangled relationship. Loving Dex had always been risky, but now it came with the added weight of family ties to Jason, a man her mother loved and respected beyond measure. Joss couldn't help but wonder what this meant for their future. Would Jason's influence push Dex further into a world of violence and danger? Or could Dex forge his own path, separate from the mob and the legacy that came with his father's name? As the news settled over Port Charles, ripple effects spread quickly. Sam McCall, who shared a son with Jason, found herself grappling with the reality that Danny now had an older half-brother he had never known. The possibility of building a relationship between the boys weighed heavily on her. She knew firsthand how important family connections could be, but she also knew how dangerous it was to be close to Jason. Could Dex's presence be a blessing for Danny, or would it only pull him deeper into a life Sam had fought to protect him from? Meanwhile, Michael Corinthos tried to balance his feelings. He had once relied on Dex, trusted him, and even plotted with him against Sonny. Now, knowing Dex was Jason's son, Michael couldn't deny the kinship he felt, yet he also recognized the complications it brought to his family's already fragile structure. Everywhere Dex went, whispers followed. He wasn't just a man who had returned from the dead, he was a symbol of secrets long buried, of truths finally surfacing, and of the unbreakable ties of family that neither time nor death could erase. His very presence forced everyone to reconsider where they stood, what loyalty meant, what family meant, and what sacrifices were worth making. For Dex, the path forward was uncertain. He wanted to honor the father he had barely known, but he also wanted to prove that he was his own man, capable of making his own choices. Yet in Port Charles, nothing is ever simple. His return had reignited old rivalries, stirred dangerous enemies, and opened wounds that some had worked hard to keep closed. The sun hung low over Port Charles, casting long shadows across the bustling docks where the salty tang of the harbor mingled with the faint, acrid scent of diesel from the freighters. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in 2025, the kind that whispered of change in the air, though few in the sleepy yet treacherous town could have anticipated the storm about to break. Dex Heller had been gone for months, or so everyone thought. The bullet from Sonny Corinthos' gun had rung out like a death knell on that fateful night, the metallic echo swallowed by the crashing waves as Dex's body tumbled into the icy depths below the catwalk. Jocelyn Jacks had screamed until her voice cracked, her hands clawing at the empty air where her lover had fallen. The search parties scoured the shore for days, but nothing surfaced. No body, no closure. Just a void that swallowed the heart of Port Charles whole. Jocelyn had buried herself in the rhythm of the city, throwing herself into her studies at PCU and the volunteer shifts at the hospital, anything to drown out the ache. Her mother, Carly Spencer, watched her like a hawk, her own grief tempered by the fierce protectiveness that had always defined her. "He's gone, Joss," Carly had said one evening over takeout Chinese in their cramped apartment above the Metro Court, her voice steady but her eyes betraying the lie. "You have to let him go." But Joss couldn't. Not when every corner of the town reminded her of Dex, the way he'd linger at Kelly's with that half-smile, nursing a black coffee while scanning the room for threats, the quiet intensity in his blue eyes that mirrored the storm clouds rolling in from the Atlantic, the calluses on his hands from years of scraping by in shadows she could only guess at. Sonny Corinthos, the kingpin whose empire Dex had both served and betrayed, carried his own ghosts. In the dim glow of his study at the Corinthos estate, surrounded by leather-bound ledgers and the faint hum of security monitors, Sonny poured another scotch, the amber liquid burning a path down his throat. He'd pulled the trigger without hesitation, convinced Dex was the traitor unraveling his organization from within. But doubt had crept in like fog off the water. What if Michael had been right? What if Dex's loyalty had been genuine, twisted only by the web of deceit spun by Anna Devane and the PCPD? Sonny's mind wandered to the young man's unwavering dedication, the way Dex had thrown himself into danger without flinching, much like another enforcer he'd once trusted with his life. Jason Morgan. The name alone stirred a cocktail of loyalty and loss, a brother-in-arms presumed dead in a cave collapse 2 years prior. If Jason were here, he'd know. He'd see through the lies, cut to the truth with that unflinching precision. Across town, in the sterile corridors of General Hospital, Dr. Monica Quartermain reviewed charts with a distracted air. The hospital buzzed with its usual chaos, beeping monitors, hurried footsteps, the occasional wail from the ER, but Monica's thoughts were elsewhere. Jason's absence had left a chasm in the Quartermain family, one that no amount of board meetings or family dinners could fill. She'd dreamed of him lately, vivid flashes of his stoic face, the son she'd lost not once but twice to the pull of Sunny's world. And now, whispers among the nurses about a John Doe pulled from the harbor weeks ago, stabilized but comatose, refusing to give his name. It couldn't be. Jason was gone, buried under rubble in Greece. Yet the description matched: dark hair, athletic build, scars that told stories of violence survived. It started with a phone call. Jocelyn's cell buzzed on the nightstand as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan's lazy spin. The caller ID read unknown, but she answered anyway, her voice thick with sleep and suspicion. Joss, a gravelly voice rasped, faint but unmistakable. Her breath caught, heart slamming against her ribs like a caged bird. Dex? The line crackled, then silence, followed by a thud as if the phone had been dropped. She bolted upright, dialing back frantically, but it went straight to voicemail. It had to be a cruel prank, some twisted soul preying on her grief. But deep down, in the pit of her stomach where hope refused to die, she knew Dex was alive. The next morning, Jocelyn stormed into the PCPD, her boots echoing off the tiled floors like gunfire. Anna Devane looked up from her desk, surprise flickering across her composed features. Jocelyn? To what do I owe this? I got a call from Dex, Joss cut in, slamming her phone down. Anna's eyes narrowed, her British accent sharpening. Impossible. We pulled the body, no body was found, Joss snapped, leaning forward, her blonde hair falling like a curtain of defiance. You said it yourself. And now he's calling me. He's out there, Anna. Help me find him. Anna hesitated, her mind racing through protocols and possibilities. Dex had been her asset, a young man she'd recruited to infiltrate Sunny's world, only for it to unravel in betrayal and bullets. If he was alive, it changed everything, exposing cracks in the commissioner's armor, reigniting old vendettas. Word spread like wildfire through Port Charles's underbelly. Brick, Sunny's steadfast lieutenant, caught wind from a dockside informant and relayed it to his boss over encrypted lines. He's breathing, Sunny. Spotted near the old warehouse district, looking rough. Like he crawled out of hell itself. Sunny's grip tightened on the phone, a vein pulsing at his temple. Alive. The kid he'd shot point blank, left for the fish. Guilt twisted in his gut, unfamiliar and unwelcome. He'd built his empire on swift justice, but this? This was a reckoning. Find him, Sunny growled. And keep it quiet. No one knows until I say. Meanwhile, in a dingy motel room on the outskirts, Dex Heller slumped against the peeling wallpaper, his body a map of bruises and bandages. The bullet had grazed his shoulder, not pierced vital organs, a miracle, or perhaps the harbor's cold embrace had slowed the bleeding long enough for him to wash ashore miles down current. He'd woken in a fisherman's shack, feverish and disoriented, piecing together fragments, the gunshot, Joss's scream, the plunge into darkness. No ID, no wallet, just a burner phone swiped from his attacker's pocket. Calling Joss had been instinct, a lifeline in the void. But now, clarity sharpened like a blade. He couldn't go back, not to her, not to the life that had nearly killed him. Not until he uncovered the truth buried in his bloodline, the secret that had drawn him to Port Charles like a moth to flame. Dex's childhood was a shadowland of foster homes and fleeting faces, a mother who faded into memory like smoke, brothers who wielded fists instead of affection. He'd enlisted young, seeking structure in the military's rigid lines, only to discharge with more questions than answers. A faded photo in his duffel, a woman with soft eyes and a man whose profile echoed his own, stoic, unyielding. Port Charles had called to him through vague intel, whispers of a father in the mob's iron grip. Sunny Corinthos, he'd thought at first. But the pieces never fit. Sunny's fire was volcanic, Dex's was ice. No, the man in the photo had Jason Morgan's jawline, the same quiet lethality. The air in Port Charles had always been thick with secrets, a palpable fog of half-truths and buried histories that clung to the old money mansions and the sterile corridors of General Hospital alike. But some secrets were more seismic than others, possessing the power not merely to disrupt lives but to shatter the very foundations upon which they were built. The return of Dex Heller from the dead was one such secret, a cataclysm disguised as a man, and the truth he carried within him, the bombshell that he was the biological son of Jason Morgan, was the tremor that would inevitably reduce the city's most formidable fortresses to dust. It began not with a fanfare, but with a whisper, a ghost of a movement in the shadows where Jason's legend was most potent. For months, the official story had been immutable, a grim gospel accepted by even the most hopeful. Jason Morgan was dead. Killed in a tunnel collapse, his body lost to the crushing weight of concrete and earth. Sonny Corinthos had mourned him as a brother, a piece of his own soul entombed forever. Carly Spencer had mourned him as her longest-standing, most complicated anchor, the one man whose loyalty had been as unyielding as granite. And Sam McCall, the woman who had loved him in so many different ways across so many turbulent years, had been forced to once again rebuild a life around the gaping chasm of his absence. Into this landscape of settled grief walked a phantom. Dex Heller had been a pawn, a fresh-faced enforcer hired by Sonny to infiltrate the Pikeman organization, a role that had placed him directly in the crosshairs of powerful, ruthless people. His presumed death, a violent and abrupt end in a warehouse shootout, had been a brutal but logical conclusion to the path he had chosen. It was a tragedy, yes, but one that made a grim kind of sense in the brutal calculus of Port Charles. His girlfriend, Jocelyn Jacks, Carly's daughter, was left shattered, another young heart scarred by the city's relentless violence. His return, therefore, was a miracle that felt more like a violation of the natural order. He didn't stride back into the Metro Court or appear at the Corinthos door. He was found, disoriented and wounded, not just physically but in some deeper, more profound way, in a flophouse on the wrong side of the tracks by a beat cop who recognized him from a missing persons bulletin. The call went to Dante Falconeri first, who then made the call that would begin the unraveling of everything. The initial wave of emotion was pure, unadulterated shock, followed by a torrent of relief, particularly for Jocelyn. Her tears were of a joy so fierce it was almost painful to witness. She had clung to a thread of hope long after everyone else had let go, and her faith was vindicated. She rushed to him, to the hospital room where he was being treated for a concussion, malnutrition, and a gunshot wound to the shoulder that had been crudely, painfully treated by his captors. Their reunion was a private storm of emotion, a tangle of whispered apologies and desperate assurances. But even as Jocelyn held him, she felt a new distance, a wall behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was holding something back, something immense. The official story Dex provided was a patchwork of plausible details. He'd been taken by a remnant cell of Pikeman loyalists, held for information, and had only managed to escape during a transfer when his captors were distracted. It was a story that held up under initial scrutiny, but it didn't satisfy everyone. Sonny, his instincts honed by decades in the underworld, watched Dex with a narrowed, contemplative gaze. The kid was different. The quiet, observant intensity was still there, but it was now layered with a new, grim resolve, a weight of knowledge that seemed to bow his shoulders. The first crack in Dex's carefully constructed narrative appeared during a routine follow-up with Dr. Lucas Jones. A standard blood panel, drawn to check his electrolyte levels post-malnourishment, revealed an anomaly. A rare antigen marker, one with significant genetic implications. Lucas, ever the thorough professional, ran a more detailed test. The results sat in his inbox for 2 days before he had a chance to review them. His curiosity piqued. When he did, he felt the floor of his office tilt beneath him. The marker was one he had seen only a handful of times in his career, a distinctive genetic signature associated with the Quartermain family. Lucas, a man caught between the worlds of medicine and the sprawling, dysfunctional dynasty he had married into, knew this was a potential earthquake. He immediately thought of Jason. Jason Morgan, born Jason Quartermain, son of Alan and Susan Moore, but famously revealed to be the son of Alan Quartermain and his mistress, Mikos Cassidy's daughter, Helena, a revelation that had itself torn the family apart decades prior. This marker was a direct link. It wasn't just a Quartermain trait, it was a specific one, passed from Alan down a direct male line. His mind racing, Lucas did what any good doctor and conflicted family member would do. He took his findings to Monica Quartermain, the family's matriarch and Jason's adoptive mother. He found her in the solarium of the Quartermain mansion, tending to her orchids, a picture of fragile grace amidst the gilded opulence. "Monica, we need to talk," Lucas said, his voice low and serious. Monica turned, her sharp eyes immediately reading the gravity on his face. "Lucas?" What is it? Is it one of the children? No, everyone's fine. It's about a patient. Dex Heller. Monica's brow furrowed. The young man who just returned? Jocelyn's boyfriend? What about him? Lucas took a deep breath, choosing his words with surgical care. I was running some follow-up blood work. Routine stuff. But I found something unexpected. Monica, he has the Allan Quatermain marker. The specific HLA haplotype. The one that Jason had. The watering can in Monica's hand trembled, a few drops of water spotting the pristine floor. The color drained from her face. That's impossible. It must be a mistake. A lab error. I ran it twice, Lucas said gently. It's no error. The genetic link is undeniable. Dex Heller is a biological descendant of Allan Quatermain. Monica sank slowly into a nearby chair, her mind a whirlwind of decades-old memories, of heartbreak and loss and a love for a son she had fought for her entire life. Jason. Her Jason. But, how? Through whom? AJ is gone. Jason is gone. Her voice broke on the word. Unless. Ned? But he has his own children, and this wouldn't be the pattern. It's a direct paternal line, Monica, Lucas said softly, forcing her to confront the only logical conclusion. From Allan to his son, to his grandson. The only living male descendant who could have passed this on directly is Jason. The world seemed to stop. The gentle hum of the mansion's climate control, the distant chirping of birds outside, it all faded into a deafening silence. Monica stared at Lucas, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying hope. Jason had a son? The implications exploded in her mind. Jason, her stoic, guarded, fiercely private son, had a child he never knew about. A child who was now a grown man, a man who had been living in Port Charles, working for Sonny, loving Jocelyn. A man who had been presumed dead and had now returned from the grave, just as his father had so many times. We have to be sure, Monica whispered, her voice trembling with a potent mix of anguish and exhilaration. We have to be absolutely certain. The quest for certainty became a silent, desperate mission. Monica, leveraging every ounce of her influence, managed to acquire a DNA sample from Dex's medical file, a stray hair from a bandage, a saved blood sample from a different test. The comparison was the true crucible. They needed a sample from Jason. This presented an almost insurmountable problem. With his body never recovered, there were no recent biological materials. But Monica was a Quatermain, and Quatermains were nothing if not thorough in their record-keeping. In a safe deposit box, along with old wills and birth certificates, she had kept a lock of Jason's hair from his first haircut, a tiny, faded blonde curl preserved in a small envelope for nearly 50 years. It was a long shot, degraded, ancient DNA versus a fresh sample. But the lab, paid an exorbitant fee for discretion and speed, was able to isolate enough markers for a comparison. The probability of paternity came back at 99.98%. Dex Heller was Jason Morgan's son. Monica held the printed report in her hands, the paper crinkling under her shaking fingers. Tears streamed down her face, not just of grief for the son she had lost, but of a staggering, overwhelming joy. Jason lived on. His blood, his line, continued. In that moment, Dex ceased to be just Jocelyn's boyfriend or Sonny's former employee. He was her grandson. But a truth of this magnitude cannot be contained. It has a gravity of its own, pulling other secrets into its orbit. Monica, in her elation, confided in Ned, seeking his counsel on how to proceed. Ned, ever the pragmatic businessman, was horrified. Monica, you can't just spring this on the boy. And my God, think of the fallout. Sonny. Carly. Sam. This will be a nuclear bomb dropped on every single one of them. Meanwhile, Dex himself was struggling under the burden. The story he'd told about pikeman loyalists was a lie. his captivity had been far more complex, and during a moment of forced inertia, a rare moment of vulnerability from one of his less guarded captors, he had been given a name. A name that was supposed to mean nothing to him, a piece of leverage his captor thought he could use. "Your old man wouldn't be too happy to see you in this state," the man had sneered. The legendary Jason Morgan. Too bad he's already pushing up daisies. The name had hit Dex like a physical blow. Jason Morgan? It was impossible. A trick. He had dismissed it until he couldn't. The seed was planted, and in the darkness of his captivity, it began to grow, fed by half-remembered snippets from his own mysterious past. His mother, a kind but perpetually anxious woman, had always been evasive about his father. The story was a simple one, a brief, passionate fling with a man who died in a car accident before Dex was born. She had no pictures, few details, and a palpable fear that grew whenever Dex asked too many questions. Now, that fear had a new, terrifying context. Upon his return, armed with this poisonous fragment of information, Dex began his own quiet investigation. He looked at old pictures of Jason Morgan, searching for a resemblance he had never noticed before. The steely blue eyes, the set of the jaw, the quiet intensity, traits he had always considered his own were reflected back at him from the ghost of Port Charles's most feared enforcer. The coincidence was too staggering to ignore. He felt like a man who had spent his life looking at a puzzle with half the pieces missing, and someone had just handed him the cornerstone. The confrontation between unknowing grandmother and unknowing grandson was inevitable. Monica, unable to contain her emotions any longer, tracked him down at the apartment he was sharing with Jocelyn. Jocelyn was out, and Dex answered the door, surprised to see the elegant, older woman standing there, her eyes red-rimmed and full of a strange, desperate affection. "Mrs. Quartermaine?" he said, confused. "Is everything all right?" "May I come in, Dex?" she asked, her voice soft. He stepped aside, a sense of foreboding settling in his gut. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew this visit was about the chasm that had opened inside him. She didn't sit. She stood in the middle of the living room, wringing her hands slightly before turning to face him, her gaze direct and filled with a lifetime of love and loss. "I don't know how to say this gently," she began, her voice gaining strength. "So I'm just going to say it. I have recently come into possession of information, undeniable, scientific information, that has changed my world. And I believe it will change yours." Dex stood perfectly still, his heart hammering against his ribs. "What information?" Monica took a step closer. "Dex. Jason Morgan was my son. And the DNA evidence is conclusive. He was your father." There it was. The words, spoken aloud by someone else, made the terrifying truth real. The ground didn't swallow him whole. The walls didn't crumble. The world simply shifted on its axis, every past event, every present relationship, recontextualized in a single, blinding instant. He was the son of Jason Morgan. The man whose empire he had briefly served. The man whose best friend he had worked for. The man whose death had cast a long shadow over the very woman he loved. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just stared at Monica, his face a mask of stunned comprehension. "I know this is a tremendous shock," Monica continued, her own tears starting again. "But it's also a miracle. To know that a part of Jason lives on, in you. It's the greatest gift I could have ever received." Dex finally found his voice, though it was rough and unfamiliar. "How?" was all he could manage. "That," Monica said softly, "is a story I don't know. Your mother, we will need to speak with your mother. But the science is irrefutable. You are my grandson." The word hung in the air between them, grandson. It was too big, too foreign. He thought of Jocelyn. Carly's daughter. His girlfriend was the daughter of his father's, what? His father's lifelong friend? His father's occasional lover? The tangled web of Port Charles relationships suddenly felt like a straitjacket. The secret, now shared between them, began to leak. Monica's behavior, the way she looked at Dex with such open, raw affection, did not go unnoticed by a city perpetually hungry for gossip. Liesel Albrecht, ever the opportunist, caught a glimpse of a fraught conversation between Monica and Dex at the hospital and began her own quiet digging. She had no love for the Quartermaines or for Jason Morgan, but she understood the value of information. The first major quake hit when Carly Corinthos stumbled upon the truth. She had gone to the Quartermaine mansion to discuss a business matter with Michael, who was increasingly involved in the family empire. She found Monica not in her study, but in the grand drawing room, standing before the massive portrait of Jason that hung over the fireplace. She was crying, but they were not tears of pure sorrow. There was a smile on her face. "Monica?" Carly said, her voice laced with concern. "Are you okay?" Monica turned, wiping her eyes hastily. "Carly." "Yes, I'm better than okay."